The names of God, we've been doing a series on all the different names of God, is by seeing different revelations that come with each name. Same God, just a different revelation. We remember how back in the Garden of Eden, everything was perfect. You saw God in all of His glory for who He was. But because of the sin of man, we've been not inventing God, because God is not there to be invented, but we've been discovering God anew from the other side of the line of sin. And so we've been journeying through the names of God as they reveal God to us, and it's a great, great journey. Many of these names are found in the Old Testament, and if you come to our church for any length of time, you'll know how much we love the Old Testament, all the principles and the promises and all of those beautiful P's that come out of it. But today we turn to the name El Shaddai. El Shaddai. It means God Almighty. It means the God who is sovereign and the God who is all-sufficient. Now, I have a bit of a Bible reading thing that I want to read with you, first of all, to set the scene here. In the book of Genesis, we see Abram experiencing God in a very unique way. God called him out of his comfort and took him on a journey to fulfill the promise that God would give to him a great nation through Isaac. He messed up a few times, had a few deviations along the way, but God's plan is never thwarted. God came out at the end. But there comes a time in Genesis chapter 17 where Abraham meets with God in a very special way. This is what it says, verse 1. When Abram, his name was Abram before he became Abraham. Abram was 99 years old. The Lord appeared to him and said, I am God Almighty. Walk before me and be blameless. I will confirm my covenant between me and you and will greatly increase your numbers. You see, there was a covenant that God had made. And if you want to find the details of that covenant, come back with me to chapter 15 and let me read to you what he's talking about. God says, I've come to confirm the covenant in chapter 17 that I made with you in chapter 15. Listen to this great story. After this, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Don't be afraid, Abram. I am your shield and your great reward. But Abram said, Oh, sovereign Lord, there it is, sovereign Lord. What can you give me since I remain childless, and the one who will inherit my estate is Eliezer of Damascus? And Abram said, You have given me no children, so a servant in my household will be my heir. Then the word of the Lord came to him, This man will not be your heir, but a son coming from your own body will be your heir. He took him outside and he said, Look up into the heavens and count the stars. Previously, he told him that he would have kids as many as the sand on the seashore. Now he's drawing another beautiful comparison. He says, Look up into the heavens and count the stars, if indeed you can count them. Then he said to him, So too shall your offspring be. Abram believed the Lord, and he credited it to him as righteousness. He also said to him, I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land to take possession of it. But Abraham said, here it is again, Oh, sovereign Lord, how can I know that I will gain possession of it? So the Lord said to him, Bring me a heifer, a goat, and a ram, each 3 years old, along with a dove and a young pigeon. Abram brought all these things to him, cut them in two, and arranged the halves opposite each other. The birds, however, he did not cut in half. Then the birds of prey came down on the carcasses, but Abram drove them away. As the sun was setting, Abram fell into a deep sleep, and a thick and a dreadful darkness came over him. And then God goes on to reassure him of a few things, and it culminates with this in verse 17. Then when the sun had set and darkness had fallen, a smoking fire pot with a blazing torch appeared and passed between the pieces. So he had cut his offering in two. There was a lot of blood over there. And one altar, and he put his offering, one half on each altar. And then he saw in his vision, this amazing thing of a fire pot and a blazing torch appeared between the pieces of his two altars. On that day, the Lord made a covenant with Abram and said, to your descendants I will give this land from the river of Egypt to the great river, the Euphrates. God was confirming something that he had said sometime before. Now, the reason that we have a name El Shaddai is it's a name of compilation. People looked at God and they said, man, if God is sovereign, if God is all passionate, and God is all powerful, and God is, according to Psalm 139, if he is all knowledge, if he is all presence, that there's nowhere where he is not. If God is all of those things, then one thing for sure, he must be all sufficient. And so they compiled all these other beautiful names, and they had many points of reference to compile the names. God had proven himself at every single point with every single name that he was totally sufficient in that area. Now, when you add up the names that he's used here, God Almighty, that's God's power, man. When you put God's power there together, then he says, oh, sovereign Lord, that means he's king. That means he's almighty. He has all power because he is that. He has all authority because he's king. Because he has all of these qualities, man, for goodness sake, he has to be El Shaddai, the all-sufficient one. Shaddai speaks of sufficiency. El is the Hebrew word for God. And so God in his total sufficiency. Now, it's a beautiful name. And there's so many applications and implications for our lives. I really hope that you get it today. I really ask God just to give me the right words to be able to explain this simply, but it'll blow your mind. Now, Scripture is full of evidence of God being who he says he was and he proved himself to be. If you add up his power, his authority, his sufficiency, he is who he says. Now, he's sufficient in two areas. The first area of El Shaddai's sufficiency, he's sufficient in himself. God lacks nothing. In his personality, he is perfect. In his attitudes, he is perfect. In his ethics, he is perfect. He's a picture of total perfection in everything that he is. Not everything he does yet, but everything that he is. His judgment and his righteousness and his holiness is balanced out by his grace and his mercy and his passion for people. He's not one or the other. He's a great combination of the extremes of both areas in every area of who he is. Every area of God's personality is perfectly in balance with another area of his personality. That's why, very appropriately for us in the church today, we're going to be really careful that we don't find some imbalances out there. That we don't find an imbalance over the grace of God, as great and as amazing as grace is, that we don't find just God is not just that. You do know that. God is also holy, he's righteous, and he can have wrath, and he can get angry. And we think a person who's full of grace and mercy and all those beautiful things couldn't possibly be that, but God is. He's a perfect blend of all of these attributes of his personality. Secondly, he's perfect in his relationship with us. He's all-sufficient with us. I'll give you an example. Have a look at Job. Job had everything that the world said was important taken away from him. His family, in one day, boom, all gone. His wealth, in one day, boom, all gone. Everything that was of value to him physically in one day was taken. A little while later, his health was taken from him. And people are saying, Job, you must have really sinned badly for God to be punishing you like this. But Job never cursed God. Even his wife said, Job, just curse God and die, man. Just curse God and die. That's the best advice she could come up with. And Job would have smiled and he just said, no. He said, even though you slay me, I'll still love him. I'll still love him. You say, how did he do that? See, Job understood the all-sufficiency of God. He understood that if I have nothing but God, I have everything. Think about that. Can God possibly be everything to us when we have nothing? Job's a good example of the fact that that can happen. And so to the nation of Israel as well, the Jewish people at that time, the revelations and the experiences they had all spoke to the evidence of his the beauty of his sovereignty and his self-sufficiency. Have you got that so far? Okay. Now there's a great picture that comes out of what I've just read to you. The Jewish people have a tradition called the blood covenant. The blood covenant. Now, you heard the story. There's a lot of blood involved in that covenant, cutting of animals in half, putting them on the two things. And then they looked at all the different aspects of who God is, and they compiled it, all the beautiful aspects of God's nature, into this covenant, and they made it relational. You see, God is not religious. You've heard that said before. God is fully desiring a deep relationship with you. He's not that concerned about all the laws and the regulations and that precepts and stuff like that. Those are to your benefit. They're not for Him. They're to protect you. But God is wanting a relationship. And the relationship I'm about to describe to you is so deep that any other relationship that you could possibly think of will be superficial in comparison to what you will see through the blood covenant. Now, the blood covenant was not just a promise that God had made, but it was a promise, because promises are a dime a dozen. We make them all the time. We don't always keep them, do we? Promises are a dime a dozen, but a covenant is different to a promise, because the blood covenant was promises sealed with blood. And God says, so intentional am I about fulfilling all these promises to you and being who I am to you in relationship with you, that I'm going to seal these promises with blood. Now, that sounds hectic, but here's the deal. Now, in this particular ceremony, there were 9 steps to a blood covenant. Each one of them speaks into a different area of our lives. Some years back, we did a sort of superficial look at the blood covenant. Well, I've been researching it quite a lot more recently, and I need to add to what I spoke about, if you remember, some time back. First thing I want to do is I want to talk you through the 9 steps of a blood covenant. I'm just going to tell you what they were. Then I want to take those 9 steps, and secondly, I want to relate them human to human, because the blood covenant is ideally just God and us, but it has a human factor. If we could live out the 9 steps of covenant relationship, gosh, I tell you people, we'd be a different nation. We're different. If we could just get it 50% right, we would be totally different people. So I want to take the 9 steps and apply them into our human relationships. And then if you forget all of that, that doesn't really matter that much. But you've got to get it from God's perspective, of God's desire for this covenant relationship with you. And I'll talk about that. So those are 3 things I want to do right now. First of all, I want to take you through the 9 steps of the covenant. If you found a covenant partner, it could be a friend, a deep friend. No, you don't have more than one. You just have one covenant partner. And you'll see how many of the things shall relate to marriage, because that's the deepest relationship, humanly speaking, that one could possibly have. And these aspects all relate into marriage. You can apply it there. But it also applied to those who found covenant partners by way of people. A man would find a guy who he just gelled with, man. And he said, you know, we've lived together, we fought together, we're ready to die for one another. And they will cut covenant with each other, the greatest depth of human relationship. Let me give you the first aspect of the covenant was an exchanging of robes. Now, you will remember this, where the guys would meet between 2 altars, and they would look at each other. They would have called a crowd of witnesses to witness this thing, because it's not something you necessarily did in public. You wanted witnesses to the covenant that you were about to cut with that particular person. Kind of like a wedding, where we invite people to the wedding to witness what we are doing as we give and receive vows one to the other. There's got to be some witnesses. So the witnesses would be called, the altars would be built, and the 2 people would stand between these 2 altars, and they would face one another. And the first thing they would do is they would take their outer robe off, and they would share them. They would swap them around. He would give his to his friend, and she would give her to the man, or whatever the relationship was that they were celebrating. And they would exchange robes, okay? The next thing that would happen is that they would exchange belts. Number 2 is belts. Now, in those days, your belts didn't just hold up your pants, you know. Your belt had your weaponry in there. Your belt had a sword in there, a dagger in there. Your belt had your 6-shooter in there. It was your belt that held everything in your armory together. And you would exchange belts one to the other. And then what would happen after you've exchanged, I'll say that the sacrifice would be made. And in the blood covenant, their sacrifice, they would take their animal and they would cut it in half and they would make a blood sacrifice. Okay? And they would put their offering on the 2 altars. And then in the midst of the sacrifice, which was really the big deal in all of this, they would do something which would be considered quite unique. They would take what was called the walk of death. And they would walk between the 2 altars. The one partner would walk this way around the altar and then come back and then go this way around the other altar. And the other one would go in the opposite direction. And they would walk around in figures of 8 around their 2 altars. And as it was just a picture of 2 lives becoming completely entwined with one another. It was a great picture of 2 lives becoming completely entwined with one another. And then what they would do is they would take a pledge in front of all the people. They would say to the people, watch this. They would say to God, God, what we did to these 2 animals, if we too do not live out this pledge and this covenant with one another, we are giving you permission to do to us what we did to these 2 animals. That's hectic. You don't want to take that too lightly. You say, God, if I mess up here, you have full permission from me to wipe me out, because that's how deep my commitment to this relationship is. And then what they would do is, number 4, they would take a knife and they could make an incision in each other's wrist on the right hand. And they would join right hands and they would mingle the blood. Okay? And they would take this thing and they would just mingle the right arm. Then what they would do is they would take dirt and they would rub it into that wound because they wanted it to fester and they wanted it to leave a nasty scar. So that every time I looked at my wrist, every time I looked at my hand, I would be reminded that I have another covenant relationship partner. And then what they would do is they would exchange names. So, okay, the number 4 was the cut and scar. Okay, let's number 5. Let's call that the scar. They would put dirt and they would make a scar. And then after they had done the scar, then what they would do is they would exchange names. Exchange names. They would swap names. Now, in our culture today, in weddings, we often have the lady who will go with the husband. Now it's changed. You can choose whichever name you would like. But in good Jewish tradition, you shared names. Your surnames would be shared by one another. They would double barrel the name so that the person that you were identified as would be now identified with somebody other by way of your name. Then what they would do is they would make statements one to the other, and they would be very honest and to declare their debts and their assets. There's none of this anti-nuptial, sorry you lawyers amongst us, none of this anti-nuptial stuff. You know, this is in community of property. You know, my stuff has become yours and your stuff has become mine. These are the debts. These are the things I've got. These are my assets. This is the kind of money that I have, and I'm throwing it all in the same pot. And then at the end of that, like with most agreements of business, they would finish with a ceremonial meal, and they would have a celebration meal. They would have a celebrating meal. And at the end of that, once they've eaten and celebrated, you know what they would do? They'd give something out there of permanence. They would plant a tree so that every time they walk past that tree, they would be reminded of the covenant they'd made. Those were the 9 steps of a blood covenant. Now, very quickly, let me take you through how these would relate to us, humanly speaking. Feel free to apply this to the areas of marriage. First of all, we talk about the robe. You know, 1 Samuel 18, we have David and Jonathan becoming best of friends. Jonathan was the son of King Saul, who should have hated David, but he loved David as a brother. And you could go and read about the covenant that they made, 1 Samuel chapter 18, as they exchanged robes, it says there. Then they exchanged belts, because now when they exchange robes, their identity changed. When people see me, they'll see my covenant partner. When they see my covenant partner, they'll see me, because he's wearing my robe. And now I've got his belt on. That means I'm going to stand in his defense. Don't back badmouth my covenant partner. I will not stand for it. I will stand to protect him or her, because not only do we have the same identity, but I'm wearing his armory, and I will stand against you for him. In Joshua chapter 9, it's an interesting story of this belts thing. There was a group of people when Joshua was taking over the promised land, and he was going in and driving out the tribes that shouldn't have been there, and they were giving this to the tribes of Israel. And a group called the Gibeonites came to Joshua one day, and they said, "So Joshua, we've walked a long way, man. We've walked from miles and miles away. Look at our clothes. They're all old, and our food, which was once fresh, is now moldy. Joshua, we've walked a long way to come and ask if we could be like a covenant partner with you." And Joshua didn't check with anybody where they came from. And he said, "Oh, all right. If you want to do that, no harm in that. Bring the piece of paper. Let's sign the treaty, and let's cut covenant between you and us." And in foolishness, Joshua did this thing. But then all of a sudden, we see how these people came back a little while later, and they said to Joshua, "We've conned you." Actually, Joshua, we were the next tribe that you were about to beat up, just on the other side of the river here. On the side of the hill, if you come to us, we live just over there. Joshua, you were going to wipe us out next, but now we are covenant partners with you. Joshua's name is dirt amongst his generals. They were upset. They said, "Why did you do that, man? Now what are we going to do?" A few months later, the Gibeonites sent a message to Joshua. "Joshua, you've got to come and help us. You've got to defend us against our enemies, because we've got a whole bunch of enemies who want to wipe us out and take our land. Joshua, remember, we're covenant partners. You said you would stand in our defense. Joshua, you better come and help us." So Joshua goes to his army and says, "Guys, we have to go and help the Gibeonites." And they say, "Nah, Joshua, you messed up badly there. We didn't approve of you signing that thing with the Gibeonites." And Joshua said, "I don't care. We are covenant partners. Get your weaponry together. We're going to defend these people." Not a popular move. But watch what happened. As they're fighting with the enemies of the Gibeonites, the day was running late, and they were winning the battle, but there were so many in the enemy. They cried out to God. They said, "Lord, we're never going to finish it today. Can you please stand the sun still for 24 hours while we do the job?" And God stood the sun still for somebody who was honoring his covenant relationship, and he was protecting the person he was in covenant with. Then God said, "I'm going to send hailstones. You guys need help down there." And he sent hailstones to wipe out the enemy of Joshua's covenant partner. You see, God gets very excited when we keep our covenant partnership under duress. He always does that. And so he defended alongside Joshua as Joshua defended his covenant partners who should never have been. But Joshua was not like us. We jack out on our relationships. You offend me and I'm done. You don't fulfill my A, B, C, and D of my priorities then I'll just go and find another friend. Joshua would never have done that. And in a covenant partnership, we're not allowed to do that. That's if you have a covenant partnership with that particular person. And then they would move on, and they would make the sacrifice. There's no blessing without sacrifice. You all know that. The only reason you've been blessed is because somebody has made a sacrifice on your behalf. This walk of death, this figure of 8, was me offering up my ego on the altar. For them, it was just an animal. For me, it's my ego, it's my values, it's my principles, it's my desires. I put them on the altar, and I'm saying to you as my covenant partner, I'm going to kill those things on behalf of you and I having a decent covenant relationship. I'm willing to sacrifice myself. That's why Paul in Romans says, offer yourself as a living sacrifice. When you get into covenant relationship with people, you're offering yourself as a sacrifice, that you are there to fulfill their will. You are there to fulfill their desires, because that's what sacrifice is all about. This is hectic stuff, is it not? And then the cord of 3 strands that we read about in Ecclesiastes, a picture of marriage. It was like this. The 3 strands are walking. You've got the 2 people, and then you've got God added in there. And it says the cord of 3 strands is not easily broken. It doesn't say it can't be broken. It can be broken. But the association with the brokenness is pain. Whenever we break relationships, any of you who have been through anything like this, a divorce or something like that, have experienced the brokenness of covenant relationship, and there's always pain associated with that. And my heart goes out to you because that pain is extreme, that pain is excessive. But God is able to minister into that situation, even though we don't always get it right. That's what I love about Him. And then they call witnesses, and they pledge. Kind of like at a wedding. It's not over till it's over. Until you've signed on the piece of paper with 2 witnesses, it's not done. The witnesses sign to affirm that you have made those covenant vows one to the other. And then the cutting of the wrist is an interesting one. We don't do that with blood anymore, but we share rings with one another, do we not? Why are we mine on my watch here? Because I keep losing it. And so, it's our covenant commitment seen in a symbol, just like the scar. And whenever you would have worked on your car or whatever you were doing and see this, you would have been reminded of your covenant partner. Every time I see this, I'm reminded I have a wife, a beautiful wife that we're in covenant with. We will defend one another. And boy, you don't want to mess with me. You'll have to answer to Eileen. It's a covenant partnership. And we have the beauty of what that brings with us, but it comes, it's kind of like, had to be the right hand. And I wonder if this is where we get the tradition of shaking hands. We shake hands with the right hand because for most people there as being right-handed, this is where they would have had a weapon. They wouldn't shake hands with the left hand like this because they could stab you with their strong hand. And so we use this as a symbol of agreement today. We shake hands. Now we don't do that so much. A handshake is not worth very much nowadays when it comes to agreements. That's why we have to have contracts, we have to sign all these things. And there's merit in that. But man, imagine if we could live our lives just hey, I agree with you. This is my commitment to you, and I'm going to live this thing out. You can test me on that. It's wonderful. The exchange of names. You've just watched it here in the dedication, where 2 families, not just 2 individuals, 2 families become one in unity and purpose and encouragement. They're still individual in their own responsible lives, but they love one another deep in relationship. They exchange names. And then we look at the scars, the identity of a covenant partner. The wedding room is a great thing. And then we look at the statements. I think Helene married me because I had a lot of money. I didn't even buy a pair of shoes when we were married. She didn't. It must be my good looks and charm or something. I don't know what it did. But we didn't have anything to share. But it didn't really matter. And now today, we share our debts. We share our assets in the relationship over here. What's yours is mine. What's mine is yours. We make that statement. Then the memorial meal at a wedding would be a reception, be cutting of cake, sharing of cake, and all that beautiful stuff, where last-minute advice would be shared with the couple. One of the most important things about a wedding reception, listen carefully, if any of you ever get to be best men or best ladies and make speeches, do you know how important your speech is? I've heard some terrible speeches. Oh, my word, I wish the floor would just open up and swallow that dude. And yet I've heard some incredibly profound one with great advice, wonderful passion, and wonderful blessing upon the couple. Memorial meal. And then number 9 would be the planting of a tree. I remember when we married Candace and Chad here at the church, one of the things we did was when people left, everybody got a tree to go and plant in your garden. So when you looked at that tree, you'll remember the 2 of them. I planted that tree down here by Kara's house, and there it is. I walk past it every day. It's growing like a vine, and it's a way of just remembering. Now, those are the 9 steps as they relate to us man to man. But here's the big deal. This is a God thing. God is all over this covenant. Let me take you through it. The exchange of robes is the first aspect. Remember last week, man, We spoke about the exchange of robes. The guy that came to the wedding, and when he in the parable and he was not wearing the right robe, he had to get to the door, and everybody else had exchanged their robe of sin and messed up lives to take on a new robe, a robe of righteousness, and the welcome into the feast of the Lord was there. But one man thought, no, my robe is good enough, and I've patched it, and I've done the best I can, but now it's done, and he was kicked out of the party. He didn't have the right robe of identity. The second thing is that there was exchange of weaponry. There was this thing that God defends us in 3 ways. You know that? There's 3 applications to the defense mechanism of God for you and for me. The one of them is in the heavenly realm, where there's a war going on out there, people, and you can't see it because we don't have spiritual eyes. But if we could have our spiritual eyes open for us, you would be shocked at what you see taking place in the spirit realm. Just think of Elisha at Dothan, and he prayed that the servant's eyes would be opened because the servant was mesmerized with the enemy he had on the horizontal level. And God said, you don't need to worry about these guys. Open your eyes and see the armies of heaven that stand for us. Greater is he who is with us than he who is outside of the walls. God stands in the spiritual realm that we can't understand. It's a mystery to us, but he stands in our defense against all the satanic stuff that's out there. God stands in our strength, and he supports us. What about the second aspect is that of God defends us down here on earth, where it's obvious. I think in the Bible, I speak about it quite a lot of Jehoshaphat. When Jehoshaphat went up against an enemy that he knew was going to beat him up, and he prayed, he said, Lord, you know I love you. You know I want to serve you. Lord, this enemy is too big for me. I can't do it. And God says, stand back. The battle is mine. You just go and worship me. And when they went to the battlefield, the whole army was dead. God stood in his defense. God is for you, people. You know that? We tend to think God is against me. No, he's not. Where did you hear that rubbish? God is for you against your sin, against the enemies of darkness, against the enemies of life. God is in your corner. And when he's in your corner, you cannot lose. And then the last aspect of the defense of God is Ephesians chapter 6, the armor of God. God has given you armor and says, here you are. You're going to suffer temptation. You're going to suffer trials. I'm going to give you armor. It's going to look like this. I'm going to give you a breastplate of righteousness. I'm going to give you a helmet of salvation. I'm going to give you the sword of the Spirit, which is the Word of God. I'm going to give you the shield of faith. I'm going to give you shoes with the gospel of peace. And I'm going to give you everything that you need to defend yourself, but it'll come from me. This is my way of defending you. For goodness sake, people, the reason we fall into temptation so much, we don't have our armor on. We're a bunch of Christian streakers running around thinking that we got to put your armor on, people, every day. But then the beauty of the armor thing is, the armor that you have, you will notice, crazily, that it only defends your front. Where's the armor for my back? Oh, God said, don't worry about your back. I got your back. I'll handle your back. Don't you worry about that. You just face the enemy and do what you have to do. I've got the rest of it. See, God is on your side. He will act in your defense. And then what about different aspects of the blood covenant? The fire pot that we read about there, and the blazing torch moving between the 2 altars. Notice who's absent. Abram's not walking with God there because God says this covenant is so deep and so big that you're never going to be able to cut it. I have to walk this one alone. And so he says to Abram, stand back, because I am going to not just defend you, protect you, and do all that thing, give you identity. I'm going to walk the walk of death for you. You just stand back and watch, because you'll never cut it. You'll never be able to do this. God says, I will do this for you. And then we have the whole cut wrist thing. We say, where are the scars? Well, have a look at Jesus' hands. When Jesus came, and he came as the risen person to the disciples, and there was Thomas saying, unless I see the scars in his hands and see the scar in his side, I'm not going to believe. Suddenly Jesus is there and said, Thomas, look, here's the scars. Every time I look at these scars, Thomas, I think of you, and I think of the sacrifice that I've made for you. And then we get beautifully poetically about it. We say, how are we going to know Jesus when we get to heaven if we all have new bodies? Well, just look for the guy with the scars in his hands. That would be Jesus. He carries those scars where the nails hung him to the cross. Man. And he still has the scars today. You'll know him by the scars on his hands. And then after that, we exchange names. Well, what name do we take? I like the name Christian. Trevor, Christian, Downham. Double barrel those things. But if you want to add the name of God to your name, people, you better live up to the responsibility of that name. Don't dare take the name of God and then go and trash it. Go and drag it through the mud. Don't take the name Christian and flaunt it in front of other people and then fail miserably in those areas that you could have controlled. You've got to discipline yourself to live according to that particular name. And I just think of Alexander the Great. Remember that story we all know? Alexander the Great was defeating nations. He ruled most of the known world. And one day they drag this young soldier in front of Alexander and they throw him down. And he says, so what's he doing here? Oh no, he's a deserter, Alexander, oh emperor. And he says to the kid, he says, hey kid, what is your name? And the kid says, sir, my name is Alexander. To which Alexander the Great replied, hey kid, either change your behavior or change your name. You see, if you want to name the name of Christ, you better honor it. Honor God's reputation if you carry his name. And the statement of debt, I love this part. I think I have to pay for all of my sin. I think I have to pay for all the wrong things I've done. God says, no, you don't have to do that. I've paid it for you. We're in covenant partnership. I have paid all of the debt of your sin. I don't want you to talk about it. I don't want you to remember it anymore. I don't want you to regurgitate it and live according to it. I don't want your self-value to be determined by the sins that I have forgiven you. I've taken them. I've thrown them away. You're never going to have to hear about those things again. And now on top of that, I've given you my assets of myself and my presence and my power. Man, this is a one-sided deal. We get our sins forgiven, we get our debts taken from us, and we get the presence and the power of God. People, it doesn't get better than that. And then lastly, in relationship to God, second of last, we have a memorial meal. It's a celebration. We're going to have one just now. And we're going to invite you to participate in that. We call it communion. And we say, this is a communion in remembrance of what Jesus has done for me, where he walked the walk of death. He shed his blood. He bears the scars in his hands. And now, in some strange way, we celebrate his death. And when I go to a funeral, I'm not celebrating anybody's death, you know. But for us, it's different because Jesus has given to us this beautiful thing called forgiveness of sins, redemption, and heaven, all because of what he did. El Shaddai is God's name of total sufficiency. He's everything. He is totally sufficient. He's everything that you need. Now, you've got to plant a tree. I thought about this and I looked across there and I saw the wooden cross up there. And I think this is a picture of what God has done for us. It's made of wood. They took Jesus and they hung him upon a tree. And they killed him. We don't look at the tree with too much fondness because that was the means of his death, but we look at it as a statement of remembrance of what Jesus has done on our behalf. I would guess that probably most of you on your bodies right now have got a cross hanging around your neck. Why do you have that? You know, a cross was a symbol of persecution, of death. It was like, why didn't you put an electric chair around your neck? They killed Jesus on the cross. Why do we because we never want to forget the sacrifice of Christ. So wear it in remembrance of who he is, to his honor and to his glory. We're going to have communion right now, and I'm going to ask Matt if he would come up and just lead us into that. But I want you just to remember the words of the song that was sung by John and the guys just now. El Shaddai, the all-sufficient one, the one who shed his blood so you wouldn't have to, the one who died so that all you would have to face is physical death, but if you're a believer in him, you live on afterwards. Man, I've got to tell you, people, that's worth celebrating. Come, Matt, where are you?